Let's get this out of the way. SNK and financial issues go hand in hand, like peanut butter and jelly, or Fightcade and lobbies I'm too scared to enter. And after asking a die-hard SNK fan in my country's FGC about underrated KOF games, I was informed that the King of Fighters 2000 fit the bill perfectly. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever played this game before. KOF 99 and 2001, sure I've played those, but not the middle child. So after conducting some basic research to see if I could make a full video out of it, I was really intrigued by what I found. On the surface level, KOF 2000 is yet another installment in the iconic series. It looks, sounds, and feels quite similar to the other games, but when you dig deep, you find that it's truly a tale of pressure. Pressure to deliver something amazing under anxious circumstances, and as SNK's capital was hit by a devastating power geyser in the late 90s, the company was on life support when bringing the franchise into the new millennium. In most timelines, the title would have been cancelled amidst SNK's uncertain future, but they persevered, and as 25 years have passed on since then, I found it appropriate to uncover the full story now. Stock up on meter and choose your striker carefully, dear viewer, as we examine the King of Fighters 2000. After building up a sizable fanbase throughout the 80s and 90s, our friends over at Shin Nihon Kikaku aimed to bring their King of Fighters series into the upcoming Y2K, a time when rapid technological advancements were taking the game industry by storm. SNK in the late 90s obviously had enough experience to continue their beloved series, but the first of many roadblocks came about when Street Fighter and Fatal Fury creator Takashi Nishiyama started to think about calling it quits. After being stolen from Capcom before the release of 1991's Street Fighter II, Nishiyama went on to have a long history of developing countless iconic SNK titles, but what's really important for us now is that according to an interview from OneUp.com, SNK's sudden explosion in staff was the catalyst for his departure. Well, SNK started to lose direction. The company had exploded to the point where there were over 600 people just in development. They made some wrong business decisions and were about to be bought out by Universal Entertainment Corporation, a Japanese slot machine company. As the head of development, I had to take responsibility for the situation and leave. Look up anything about Nishiyama, and you'll find that his last KOF game was 99, so losing a key member of the team couldn't have been easy for KOF 2000's developers. I'm not sure if the gaming press treated this departure as a big deal at the time, what with there seemingly being no articles written about it, and it's not even mentioned in the SNK developer diaries. These are an extensive series of passages written during 2000's creation, and they provide unique insights behind the game's development. Speaking of development, KOF 2000 supposedly began in 1999 under the name of the King of Fighters Millennium, with Neo Geo Freak magazine in Japan claiming as such. I think? I mean, Wikipedia claims that this is the case, and after translating these images into English, I thought I would have the answer, but they turned out horribly, so I'm unable to read through the original source and verify this claim for myself. What I can verify, however, is that the game's original name was the King of Fighters 00. This actually sounds pretty cool, but it apparently failed trademark checks against video game music CDs. The author of this diary is just as confused as I am, and I don't think he could reveal the company behind the trademark's registration for legal reasons, so the full 2000 number was included in the game's title instead. SNK developer Nishikawa stated that development on the title was almost completed on June 21st, 1999, and this means that the game's developers theoretically finished the whole project in just over a year, which is wicked fast, especially when you remember their brand new mechanics and characters. Many developers who worked on the diaries casually recall what it was like to create these features, with fresh gameplay experiences being their goal. You may think that there would be way more exclusive information about KOF 2000 or even KOF as a series in general here, but you would be surprised. Many of these entries don't have anything to do with the game, so I assume the developers ran out of things to say after a certain point. Valentine's Day, Y2K, and the linguistics of underwear are all discussed here, so it's a real cornucopia of randomness. I can picture a bunch of SNK staff being really bored at work and deciding to pass the time by writing whatever stream of consciousness was flowing through their mind at the time. However, it's not all positive, as melancholy messages explaining that certain staff members left the company throughout production can be found too, with the industry's high turnover rates being elaborated on. Nishikawa wrote on April 10, 2000 that despite SNK's new hires beginning their training, the KOF team remained identical, with no extra manpower being allocated for them to use. A lack of staff was also the reason for there not being many machines during initial Japanese location tests in arcades, with developers expressing their sympathies towards players who were forced to wait in line. These diaries are all well and good, there's nothing wrong with them, but they were challenging to research, as they often contradicted what Wikipedia claimed about them. The web page states that Terry and Andy were, quote, unbalanced in the previous game which led to revisions, unquote. But when you read the developer diary, you find that SNK staff member Lonely Aoki reports that their pairing continues to work well in 2000. The listed combo of Andy's striker attack into Power Geyser wasn't changed at all, and the same inconsistency applies to Wikipedia's mention of licensing issues. When we click the listed source, there are no mentions of character licensing. Instead, we find recollections of weird dreams, fan rumors, and even a high school class going to SNK's offices as part of a school excursion. That would have been really cool. In the years that I've been making videos for this channel, I've never run into this many inconsistencies surrounding a game's creation, and having to check them all while sick was a nightmare. Now, going back to what I put on screen before, I don't think Takashi Nishiyama stated this next point publicly, but I believe he saw the writing on the wall regarding SNK's income and got out early, with his doubts about the future being clear as day. This statement persuades me to think that even SNK's most revered developers were seriously doubting the company's ROI, which is pretty rough. If they were, then they hit the nail on the head, as SNK's Western business ventures collapsed on June 13th, a mere month before Nishikawa's foreboding statement. To make matters worse, it was reported a year later in 2001 that the company accumulated a total of 38 million yen in debt. Wait, did I say million? Because I meant to say billion. SNK was drowning in an ocean of unpaid bills, with their hopes and dreams of expanding to untapped audiences being rejected in the form of low sales. On top of this, the studio was experiencing staff resignations, tight deadlines, an acquisition by the Pachinko company, and the aforementioned closure of their Western operations. KOF 2000 did not have a smooth development process, with numerous bugs being discovered by players throughout its lifespan as evidence. But despite all of this, SNK got it done. Despite having a crappy hand dealt to them by Japan's economic stagnation at the time, they reached the finish line and finally released the game in arcades. When playing KOF 2000 for the first time, you'll instantly notice that the series' classic gameplay formula returns, with there being 4 buttons for you to do battle with. These can lead to all sorts of attacks and defensive tools, so I'd recommend learning a few of your character's pokes and combo tools when starting out, and if you find a really good button, you can go to town on unsuspecting opponents. Juggling between offense and defense is key in KOF, as it can be easy to act on impulse and make a simple mistake. Rolling at a bad time or getting your striker attack baited may seem like really simple mistakes, but they can have huge ramifications. Special and super moves return too, with there being 2 levels off the ladder. Desperation moves cost 1 bar of meter, and Super Desperation moves cost 3, so you can think of them as level 1 and level 3 supers respectively. They're all wildly different from each other, and they can occupy distinct ranges on the screen, which helps to make the fighters feel unique. In fact, this uniqueness is quite possibly my favorite aspect of the title, and look, I know I mentioned this in all of my KOF videos, but the characters really don't feel homogeneous. Sure, they all have access to the basic universal mechanics, but SNK have done a wonderful job at providing standout personalities and aesthetics to each of the game's characters, even the unplayable strikers. I remember stating in my Capcom Fighting Jam video that the characters in that game feel so different from one another that there was nothing tying them together, resulting in a roster that felt more like a Mugen game where random characters are thrown into the mix without any rhyme or reason. On the other hand, KOF 2000's confident use of engaging system mechanics and combo structure neatly glues its roster together, but their unique attack properties feel like a breath of fresh air. One of the most underrated qualities of fighting games is how characters can express personality through animations, and SNK has always been godlike at this. K-Dash is my favorite example, as his focused yet dismissive body language tells us that he's not the most engaged kind of guy, and he really wishes he could be fighting someone stronger. Compare that to Bao, for example, and we can tell that this little dude is raring to go. He's full of youthful energy, and his bouncing is something that real-world martial arts do too, although Bao's lack of experience is probably why his movements aren't that reserved. Those are only 2 examples that I've thought of, mind you, but if I were to analyze every fighter, we would find that they all have pronounced quirks in their visual designs. Okay, going back to the gameplay now. Meter can also be used to call on your striker, with this mechanic being the primary gameplay hook. When deciding your team order, your final character will become your striker, and they act as an assist fighter. You can't tag into them, but pressing B and C will summon them for the cost of 1 striker bomb, leading to all sorts of shenanigans. Strikers come in all shapes and sizes, and they assist with combo extensions, resets, and even healing sometimes. Determining which striker best complements your team is a crucial component of KOF 2000's strategy, and you can leave a lot on the table if you choose poorly. As there are 32 playable fighters, you would think that there would be 32 strikers, right? I mean, if every character has the potential of being a striker, this would check out just fine. Well, SNK, being the chads that they are, decided to include even more strikers. Every character has an extra striker associated with them, and they're often older characters who didn't quite make the cut. Hell, some of them aren't even from KOF, so if you've ever wanted to use a Bariki 1 character as an assist, go for it. It's always a joy to see which character you can select when deciding your team, mainly due to the fan service being off the charts. Dude, I just about died when I saw Fio from Metal Slug, it was awesome. That's not all though, as there exist even more strikers, and these are called Maniacs. By highlighting the alternate striker here and inputting a cheat code, they'll be replaced by the Maniac. Unfortunately, there are only 8 Maniacs in the game, but some of them are quite strong, and there are also some interesting ones. I'm not sure how exactly Neo and Geo are exploding, but I think they're okay? I hope? Including a whole assist mechanic into KOF's repertoire of complex systems might seem like overkill, but believe it or not, there's still more. With full meter, press B, C, and D to enter armor mode, or A, B, and C for counter mode, with both of them being invincible on startup. The former gives you a 25% damage increase, extra hit stun on light and jumping normals, chip kill prevention, more pushback on hit, and hyper armor. It's a fantastic way to bully enemies who are on low health, and if they slip up, the damage buff means you can punish them, big time. Counter mode provides the same damage buff, but it removes the screen freeze from supers and lets you cancel certain specials into supers. This results in otherwise impossible combos and hit confirms, so it can transform the way you see neutral. What I love most about these installs is that they both provide player expression without being overbearing, and it's common to see games where they're not even used. KOF 2000 never forces you to activate these forms if you don't want to, so it's entirely up to you as the player. Have you theory crafted a deadly way to use one or even both of them? Great! If not, then you can always use your meter for a super or a defensive technique. Utilizing them effectively requires pre-established knowledge of how to properly play KOF, so don't think that they'll carry inexperienced players to easy wins. You still have to win neutral after all, and if you're struggling by yourself, try and see what your partner can do. I'm sure there are hyper-specific applications of the striker and install mechanics that are going over my head as a new player, but even with my lack of experience, I found that KOF 2000 is a very enjoyable fighter, even without optimal assist combos and whatever else you can think of. Players of all skill levels can have a blast with their favorite fighters, as even the simplest of techniques feel rewarding to perform. Sliding through a fireball to gain ground or baiting a wake-up DP is nothing mind-blowing in the grand scheme of things, but KOF's unique gameplay feel lends itself to these situations, and they'll never get old. The more you put in, the more you'll get out, so if everything I've described has started to intrigue you, I urge you to give the game a shot and descend down the KOF 2000 iceberg. Trust me, I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff when spectating matches on Fightcade, especially when it's between two Mexican players. They're nuts! As quite a bit of KOF sales information from 25 years ago has been lost to time, attempting to find details about 2000's performance in the West was something that I tried but ultimately failed to do, although our friends over in Japan thankfully archived some of their data for us to look at. Japanese publication Game Machine's September 1st, 2000 issue reportedly stated that KOF 2000 was the second most successful arcade game in August that year, but as this source is seemingly impossible to find online, I'm unable to verify its claims. On the other hand, I was able to find that after being ported to the PS2 in November 2002, KOF 2000 managed to sell 37,316 copies, making it the 263rd best-selling PS2 game in Japan that year. For only 2 months of annual sales, I don't think this is that bad, and the game even outranks the iconic Super Monkey Ball 2, much to Gongon's despair. Moving forward into 2017 now, KOF 2000 had somewhat of a resurgence on the PS3's digital store, where it consistently appeared in the PS Classic sales charts, and it even made it to number 2 in July, which really impressed me. Other than that, there's really not much else that gives us a clear indication as to how the game sold, and just when I thought that analyzing reviews would be easier, I ran into somewhat of a roadblock. Aside from its initial worldwide release in arcades, the title stayed exclusive to Japan and Korea before returning to the West twice more. Its 2003 bundle with KOF 2001, and its 2015 digital re-release on the PS3. That's 15 years of near exclusivity to Asia, so it makes finding English reviews for the original Neo Geo version quite the challenge. Aside from import reviews published by IGN and GameSpot, who did theirs in 2006 for some reason, don't ask me why, most reviews that pop up online are about 2000's HD ports to the Switch and PS4. Character animations, background art, and audio are what you'll see being praised by contemporary reviews, as well as the striker system. Its improvements and new features here indicate that SNK took the time to study the mechanic in KOF 99 and learn how to evolve it for a new game. The only shared complaints I noticed from older reviews relate to the game's two-dimensional aesthetics, and if you've been a fan of fighting games for a while, I'm sure you've heard talking points like this before. These brand new consoles with their 3D graphics are so cool. Man, why don't more fighting games utilize 3D models? They look way better than the games with the old school sprite art. Yep, KOF 2000 fell victim to this belief too, and as the period's amazing technological advancements were still in the cultural zeitgeist at the time, I don't blame critics for feeling this way. Criticism leveraged by GameSpot towards the fighter's color contrast and the Neo Geo's overall color palette limitations can be found online, although IGN was way harsher with their opinions on the game. Any aspect of the title's graphics you can think of were pretty much torn to shreds by them, and their concluding statement wasn't too hot either. In fact, I found this to be the norm, as after sifting through tons of reviews from major outlets complimenting KOF 2000's battle systems and striking characters, none of them were overwhelmingly positive overall. You would be hard-pressed to find a score higher than a 7 out of 10, you might get an 8 if you're lucky, although there are unofficial fan sites that ooze with admiration for the title. Remember what I said during the intro about KOF 2000 being underrated? Well, I think that this is a prime example, as there's a clear disconnect over the game's quality between review outlets and the core fanbase. The people who love spending their time writing KOF related articles and hanging out in the 2000 Fightcade lobby possess a deeper understanding of the game than any games journalist ever could. And look, I'm not knocking these reviewers. It's just that after having spent so much time with the title, it's begun to appeal to the diehard crowd in a way that won't apply to most people. You know how when you head over to Rotten Tomatoes, you can find films with a low critic but high audience score? It's a lot like that, as if you're games journalist McGee and you had to write about KOF 2000 for your job, it wouldn't have seemed very different to the previous games that you covered not too long ago for your games website. On the other hand, if you were a KOF superfan sitting in some dingy arcade that was a front for heroin trading, then your passion would have resulted in a more positive experience. Yes, this is real. Okay. Moving on from that, it's safe to say that KOF 2000 has had a noticeable legacy, as most of its newcomers became fan favorites and some even appear in future entries. It's not hard to find Vanessa, Cooler, Ramon, etc. in the HD KOF titles, and they still kick major butt. Although the striker system may be nothing more than a fleeting memory in this day and age of KOF, it did return for 2001 with some pretty noticeable changes, and I have a video covering that game if you'd like to learn more. Normally that would be all, and we'd move on to the outro, but during my research I found out that there's actually a KOF 2000 audio CD adaptation. If you understand Japanese and you want to hear 2000's narrative being acted out, try listening to it online, and hell, if you like physical media, you can even find a copy on Discogs. In addition to this, there were also 2 manga adaptations that were released in Japan, and I wish us Western fans had translations because they look like a lot of fun to read. Other than that, there are plenty of ports for players to get their hands on, with the PS2 and Dreamcast conversions containing extra stages and fighters. I would suggest trying them out if you're concerned with getting the most amount of content possible, but if you're a true gameplay purist, definitely stick with the arcade version on Fightcade. Outside of a few newcomers, KOF 2000 may not have the wider cultural significance of, say, KOF 98 or 13, but it's still a really fun time, one that I'd recommend you try out if you've never played the game before. It proudly shows off the skeleton that every KOF game is built on through its basic mechanics, but its altered striker system and new fighters help it appeal to those looking for something a bit different. Look, I know I've said this a billion times by now, but I still can't believe how SNK managed to contain itself in its darkest days and deliver a finished product that runs on multiple systems. I believe that the title's successful development and release was instrumental in keeping the series afloat throughout the 2000s, as if this game were to be cancelled, who's to say the next games wouldn't have been too? Having to balance the changing expectations of a growing market, the application of brand new technology, and leaking money out of all of your holes couldn't have been easy for poor SNK, but they were courageous enough to get the job done. I would love to go back in time and be a fly on the wall during development, but now that I think about it, the staff diaries are the closest thing to this. It's not often that we as players are given access to the honest and unfiltered anecdotes of otherwise anonymous game designers, and they're fantastic at humanizing these figures. I'm sure that the development team responsible for KOF 2000 were regular people with normal hobbies, interests, and families, and I wonder what they're up to now. The frantic pressure behind the title's creation could have ruined it, but because nice things can happen in the world, this luckily wasn't the case, and SNK shot out a game that is worthy of having the KOF name. Okay, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. To be honest, I made this video after getting out of the hospital. I was really sick and it took a lot out of me, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. Okay, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.